Hello, wellness friends. This is AJ Webb, your SLV Health Wellness Coordinator, and I have a treat for you. I got to sit down with Director of Clinical Nutrition Adam Lawrence and speak with him about diet and nutrition and a bunch of different things. And the reason I wanted to sit down with Adam is because the new year is approaching, and if you're like me, that always means I'm taking something out of my diet or putting something in, or I'm going to choose this new diet. It means a lot of different things. And to be able to sit down with someone who's educated to educate me about some of the common pitfalls, what's conventional wisdom, what are myths, and debunk some of these things was extremely useful. So Adam is a registered dietitian, which means that he's gone through and earned an undergraduate degree in dietetics. He has a master's in food and nutrition, as well as over 1,600 hours a national exam. So he has gone through the rigors to earn the credential of a registered dietitian. Now, when you're on the internet, it's really easy to play nutritionist because a nutritionist doesn't always have a credential. So that's something to look out for as you're vetting out what is valid, what is legitimate information. So sitting down with someone educated like Adam Lawrence was a terrific experience for me. He's a wealth of knowledge, and him and I have had some very constructive conversations around nutrition and how we can use it to support our wellness. In this conversation, we sat down and we talked about water, how much of it we should drink in order to help ourselves out with our nutrition goals. We talked about nutrient timing. So when should we eat? Is it better to eat 6 small meals? Is it better to eat fewer meals? We talked about artificial sweeteners and how to navigate those. We talked about protein and carbohydrate and how much of those an individual should eat. We even drew up some equations on how to figure that out on a per grams basis. We talked about fats and what are healthy sources of those, and then we wrapped everything up, and I gave Adam 7 buzzwords in diet and nutrition, and he got to respond with what he thought about those particular diets or buzzwords, and we got some real insight about those different things. It was an amazing conversation, and it was very useful for me. So in order to support sitting down with these health experts and learning from them, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, share this video with your friends, maybe even like the video, leave some comments so that we can support continuing to sit down with experts and use their knowledge, experience, and wisdom to help us out with our own wellness. So, without further ado, Mr. Adam Lawrence. Disclaimer: do not use this information as medical advice. Instead, see your own family doctor for care. The opinions expressed do not represent the opinions of SLV Health. There we go. Adam Lawrence, welcome to the Wellness Cave. Thanks for joining me for some nutrition topics. I'm excited to interview you, man. You got to be approached so much. I could only imagine on a regular basis about, hey, what should I eat? It's this, big mystery for a lot of people. And let's talk a little bit. But first, could you please tell me what is your title here at SLV Health? Sure. And what do you do on a regular basis?
So I'm the director of clinical nutrition here, and what I do on a regular basis is basically mainly inpatient stuff. So from that standpoint, it's sort of going through doing chart reviews on pretty much everybody that comes into the door, and just making sure that they're getting all the nutrition that they require. So let's say somebody physically can't eat, then maybe we have to do a tube feed on them, whether it be short-term or long-term. We could also feed directly into the blood. So those are my favorite things to do. And then, from that standpoint, making sure people are on appropriate therapeutic diets if they require supplementation for calories or protein. And then also looking at certain markers where I might be checking to see if they need a certain vitamin or mineral supplement. Okay. Because some of those can be beneficial in wound healing and for things like people who have alcohol problems.
Okay. All right. So inpatient people come in, they're checked into the hospital, and you're going over making sure that they are getting the nutrients and the different macronutrients that they need to get better, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Awesome. Where did you study, and how did you decide to become a nutritionist?
Sure. So I studied at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, not Kentucky. Everyone thinks Bowling. There is a Bowling Green, Kentucky. And so I got my undergraduate degree in dietetics there, and then I also got my master's of food and nutrition from Bowling Green, and did my dietetic internship there through that organization as well. And what was the second part there?
I don't remember, but that's a big chunk of school right there. So
Sure.
how so 6, 7 years?
Yeah, so 6 years in total. And the general course for a dietitian is typically at least 5 years, because you have to get your undergraduate degree. In most cases, there are a very few combined programs which you can become a dietitian in 4 years, but that's extremely rare. It's usually a 5-year program. You do your undergraduate, and then you apply to internships, and you try to do essentially a year internship.
Right on. So is there one word that you kind of hang your hat on? Like if I sat next to you on a bus and you said, would you say, I'm a nutritionist? Is that the way you'd phrase it? What would you say?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I would probably say dietitian.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's been kind of this long-standing disdain for each of those words. So a dietitian traditionally would not like being called a nutritionist, and a nutritionist physically could not be called a dietitian.
I see.
So I guess to explain the difference, is a dietitian has to go through an internship where I believe it's about 1,600 hours of supervised practice, and then you also have to complete a national exam and pass that. So without doing that, you physically cannot get your RD credential.
Okay.
However, with a nutritionist, that's much more lax. Essentially, anyone can call themselves a nutritionist.
I see.
I mean, you might walk into a gym and somebody who read Men's Health yesterday is your nutritionist for the day at that gym. So the newest credential, which I've actually adopted, is what's called RDN, and a dietitian's allowed to use that, and that's just registered dietitian / nutritionist. So the reason why I use it is because most people have a pretty fair idea about what you do if you say you're a nutritionist. But if you say the word dietitian, some people have no clue what that means.
Okay. Well, thanks for clearing that up. Because again, if there's people that approach you about a lot of different questions they have about food, words like dietitian, diet, nutrition, those get thrown around. Very, very similar to wellness. A lot of folks take it and they run with whatever direction they want to, and it's nice to clear up some of the technical components of that the jargon of your profession.
Sure.
So as the dietitian, I'd like to know a little bit more about how you came to work at SLV Health and how long you've worked for San Luis Valley Health.
Sure. So I've been here. I'll be coming up on my 8th year.
Wow.
This coming September. So been out here for a little while. And I guess essentially how it came about, I mean, the reason I got interested in the field in the first place is that I do have quite a few family members who were overweight and obese and had weight problems. And so that was something I always wanted to try to help. And I had family members with diabetes and some of those other chronic diseases that I know nutrition can help with. And the other thing for me is just that in high school, I was a 3-sport athlete. And, I always thought if I can, get my nutrition in line, it was actually the first health class I ever had where it just kind of was like, wow, this is, because I never thought about food that way. Most people don't think too much about food. They just put it in their mouth and it's kind of what you eat to survive. But that sort of opened my eyes, and I thought that it could help me be a better athlete. So that's a big reason. And then as far as coming to the Valley, I had actually just graduated from grad school, and I kind of pulled up a map of the U.S. and I wanted to be somewhere with mountains. And so Colorado at that time was my number 2 state that I wanted to end up in. Now knowing it should have been my number 1 state. But this job, actually, my former boss did his distance internship through the same university I went to. And so he reached out to our internship director and kind of let everyone know that there was a position opening here. And as soon as I read the description, I applied.
Yeah.
A couple minutes later, and
Nice.
I guess the rest is history. I just sort of got a moving truck and came out probably 3 weeks later. Yeah.
There we go. Coming from the gray skies of Ohio to the sunny skies of Colorado.
Right.
300 days of sunshine, that's got to be a nice thing. And you're very active. You like to be outside doing everything, playing softball.
Yep. Yeah, softball's still going on for me, believe it or not. I got another tournament in February. But, just being here where you have the opportunity to be so active. In Ohio, when winter rolls around, you hibernate, essentially. I mean, that's really, like you said, gray skies, 24/7. The weather's terrible. So much snow and ice, a lot of ice. And so you're shoveling snow all winter long, and you're just hibernating, kind of gaining weight. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you use nutrition at an early age to work to get yourself an edge as an athlete. And I can relate similarly as a lineman in football. You know, gaining weight was what you talked about every single day with your coach.
Sure.
Because I was a pretty lean kid, and my coach, eat, son, you got to eat, got to have this amount of calories. And, I'm being, no pun intended, fed all kinds of different information, which eventually came to adopting the more the better, the bigger and badder I can get, was good. The advice then was to drink Slim Fast with meals.
Sure.
And a bunch of different things. But that was kind of, it was always this volume-based, this do these things.
Like the dirty bulk, huh?
Probably, right?
Sure.
Where if you're having, a half a slab of birthday cake with breakfast, those were things that I did in this quest to consume as much food as possible with the idea that this was going to make me bigger and make me more successful in my sport, football. And as I transitioned out of the world of sport, out of, multiple workouts a day, burning all those different kinds of calories, and having a much different need out of my nutrition, I started to work and sift out these different things, but not under formal schooling and not under, the training that you've had. So I've had to work my way through the myths, debunk some stuff, and I definitely haven't found any truths, but it's... I think that you and I, in our past conversations, we've come to, some conclusions on some basic principles around some things that are just in general good to hang your hat on.
Sure.
And with everybody or most folks, they'll be starting a new diet regimen come January 1. This is the year.
Right.
This is when, I'm going to do it. I'm going to change this. I'm going to exercise. Lots of variables going into their new routine, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk to you about water in this whole thing, right?
Sure.
Because in advice, growing up in Arizona, water was one of the things. Like, I drank a gallon between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. before practice because I had to, because I knew I would feel poorly during practice. And they feed you it because they don't want to kill you. Like, that's bad form there.
Sure.
So that was really just a second nature thing for me, and it continues to be, but it's not necessarily when I got to Colorado and started playing, college football in Colorado, those same things weren't there. So I want to know, how important is water in starting a new diet regimen, and our overall, how important is it in our overall success with a nutrition plan?
Sure. I mean, so water is key. Water is absolutely essential. If you want to do a quick calculation, basically to figure out what your needs are, essentially what you do is you take your body weight in pounds, divide it in half, and that's the amount of fluid ounces you should be drinking. Gotcha. In the hospital, we use more metric systems. So we generally say, for most of the population, about 30 milliliters per kilogram of body weight. So if you wanted to figure it out that way, you'd essentially take your weight in pounds and divide it by 2.2. That would then give you your weight in kilograms. Whatever that number is, you multiply by 30. You have a good idea of how many milliliters. So, most bottles, like particular, this one here has ounces and milliliters on
Right.
it. So you could kind of use either one as a gauge.
Roger that. So
But
just if I could do a quick dummy calculation.
Sure.
So I'm AJ. I weigh, let's just say that I weigh 230 pounds.
sure.
So you said take that in half?
Yep, exactly.
All right, so that gives me 115, and then I would want to drink 115 ounces?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That's your daily, what you should have daily.
Now, is that just water, or do I
Right,
include my
right.
teas and my coffees?
Exactly. So that's where a lot of people get confused. They think, oh, I've got to have this amount every single day, and that's not just water. That does include all the fluids that you have, and quite honestly, some of the food you eat is going to have a high amount of fluid in it as well.
Okay.
I mean, a classic example would be watermelon, right? It's very high in water. A lot of fruits are going to have fluids in them as well. But this is just kind of a general guideline. So,
Gotcha.
It's a good thing for you to shoot for. If you have that little bit extra by adding in your teas and things like that, is that okay? Yeah, for the most part. The other thing is that with teas and coffees and things like that, they can have a diuretic effect. So even though they do technically count as fluid, a lot of times you're not going to hang on to it. So really, some additional fluids may be needed even though you are drinking fluid with your teas and your coffees.
Gotcha. So let's say I've cleaned it up. I'm eating some some high quality proteins and some fruits and some veggies and things like that. But I'm just not a water person.
Right.
What am I missing? Am I missing the boat there if I'm not drinking water while I'm eating clean? Like, it's obviously a step in the right direction to eat clean, but tell me, what am I missing out there?
Yeah, well, it's huge. You're going to miss out on a lot. Really, the body just does not function properly unless you're well hydrated. And so, you brought up sports earlier. So what's interesting in athletics, right, is that you have kind of two different schools. You have the educated athletic school, and you have the not so educated athletic school, right? The gym science, okay?
Right, yeah, bro science.
And within athletics, and I can tell you this is the school I came from, was the gym science. You were weak if you drank water.
Oh, yeah.
Your coach would yell at you, "You're not going to the water fountain until I tell you can go to the water fountain," right? But the reason why that should not exist is because hydration status is the number one thing. And everybody wants to talk about supplements, et cetera, because those are fancy, right?
It's sexy.
It's a hot topic, but nothing will improve your performance or hinder your performance more than your hydration status.
Put that in a quote. Nothing will improve or hinder your performance nor than your hydration status. We went over a basic equation to figure out how much we should drink, but if we got to figure out, I've heard the color of your urine is going to, help you determine how hydrated you are, right? So on a spectrum from clear to Coca-Cola, is there an ideal spot?
Yeah, really, a lot of people will just say, I'm peeing clear, right?
High five.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be exactly clear. Okay. Really, just a slight amber color, just a very little
hue.
Yeah. I mean, that's you can tell you're well hydrated there. Obviously, everybody can think about it from the perspective of when they wake up in the morning. Usually the urine's very dark and concentrated. One of the best things you can do is immediately when you wake up is to have a glass of water.
Yeah.
So water, not only from an athletic perspective, but let's just think about where we are, right? So we're at a high elevation, arid climate, okay?
Feet.
So, people don't necessarily maybe sweat like they would in a humid climate, right? Or people don't perceive they sweat.
Right.
They're still sweating. It just gets wicked away very quickly.
Yeah.
So because of the particular environment we live in, such a dry climate, you are at risk for dehydration more than other places. And so what happens when you get dehydrated? Well, one of the most basic things in the human body stops functioning properly, and that's digestion.
Okay.
And so therefore, when you start having issues going to the restroom, one of the number one things you need to evaluate is whether or not you're getting enough fluids in a day. And I will tell you that constipation, things like that, that plagues a huge percent of the population here. And sometimes it can be as simple as making sure you get the proper amount of hydration. There are other things that can go into that as well. But without good GI function, the rest of the body starts to suffer too.
Right. So, all right. So now, I've decided, okay, I'm eating clean, and I'm going to work to drink some more fluids. Okay. The amount of the different varieties there are of different sweeteners and options, low calorie, no calorie, all these different things. I've seen folks that say, I don't like water, but I'm trying to drink more of it. So throughout, all morning and all the afternoon of the workday, I'm using, Crystal Light. I'm using these different artificial sweeteners. Now, that is, I would assert, is probably better than drinking a 12-pack of the Dooskies, right?
Yeah.
But there are some things that kind of come along with those artificial sweeteners, right?
Sure. Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I think, you're going to hear, well, this sweetener is generally recognized as safe or GRAS, right? That's the term that's thrown around a lot.
On which one you're using.
Right. Now, what's the issue with that? A lot of things are generally recognized as safe. But what does the research actually say? So yes, I would agree with you that maybe having a little bit of a flavored water might be better than somebody who's drinking sodas all day long.
Right.
However, the issue is that people assume that these zero-calorie sweeteners, which by the way are not 0 calories. Mm-hmm. So we'll take Splenda. I don't know if you all can see this Splenda package. So we'll take Splenda for example. So this is a 1-gram packet of Splenda. Mm-hmm. So in the food industry, label laws really dictate what has to be listed on this pack and how we can classify an object. So Splenda right here says no calorie sweetener. Okay. That is 100% a lie.
Okay.
The first ingredient in Splenda is dextrose.
Okay.
So for any nurses who might be looking at this, dextrose is basically a very pure form of sugar. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's what we use in IVs. When somebody in the hospital needs a little sugar in an IV, they get dextrose. That's actually the number 1 ingredient. The number 2 is sucralose, which is actually the generic name for Splenda. So how do they get away with listing this as a no-calorie sweetener?
It's like rules and laws, right?
Exactly. Okay. So basically the reason why is because this is a 1-gram packet. Okay. And dextrose only provides 3.4 calories per gram. The label law says if it provides 5 calories or less per gram, you can list it as 0 calories. So not only is the 0 calorie, well, with Splenda in particular, completely false in some cases. It's just an advertising ploy. But the other thing is that these no-calorie sweeteners like sucralose, like Sweet and Low, which I believe is saccharin, they still can cause essentially an insulin response in the human body. Okay. So what happens is that you taste sweet, essentially, and your body expects that it's going to get calories because that's the way that it's worked since the dawn of time, right? And when you don't really get these calories, you're still going to end up getting an insulin spike, so the body's ready for that. And what can happen is essentially it can stimulate you to intake calories later. So when you look at the research, somebody who's drinking, say, regular soda and decides that their health kick for the new year is going to be switching to diet, the research actually says at the end of 1 year, regardless of whether you drink diet or regular, you will have gained the exact same amount of weight.
Really?
So not only from a weight gain perspective, but there are studies that support that these can also contribute to insulin resistance. So some other pretty bad things that we don't necessarily want to happen.
Right. So let's we can kind of pause on these sweeteners real quick, and I want to get into just a few words. You said insulin resistance, insulin spike. Let's talk about when you should eat really quick, because I think that this is something that again is some low hanging fruit, right? So now you're hydrated and your body's functioning, you're able to move everything. That's awesome. Now, because we can run into some issues with a grazing type of a situation throughout the day in regards to how our body's responding to the food that's being put into our bodies, even if it is a high quality source like a nice organic pear or something like that. Right. When should people eat, and what are some of the things that by eating at certain times people can take advantage of?
Sure. Well, this is like a huge debate.
Okay.
Huge debate. And most simply put, the reason why it's a huge debate is because there's a lot of money involved.
Okay.
A lot of money involved for the food industry.
Right.
So when you talk about these sorts of things, you mentioned grazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody has heard their entire lives, you just got to eat 5 to 6 small meals a day, revs up the metabolism.
Right.
Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the interesting thing is there's really almost no research to support that.
Okay.
There's also research that pretty much denies the fact that your metabolism will rev or increase if you have multiple meals in a day. Mm-hmm. In fact, research basically essentially denies that. So,
wow.
So this whole thing of eating multiple meals a day and snacking, et cetera, which we've all been taught, and that's myself included,
right.
There's really not research to support that. When you do look at what the research actually shows, again, breakfast doesn't rev your metabolism either. That's mm-hmm. what the research says. It shows that if you can incorporate, some fasting periods in your diet, which a lot of people think is a scary thing, is not mm-hmm. safe. And for certain populations, they probably shouldn't be doing this, okay? Mm-hmm. But if you can incorporate some fasting periods in the diet, first of all, it does improve your insulin resistance, so makes you more sensitive to insulin. Does help you get at some of that body fat that otherwise is extremely difficult to get at and burn as energy sources. Mm-hmm. And that's simply changing the times when you eat. So not doing a grazing pattern like we've always been taught. And so I guess people will say, oh man, this guy's crazy. Mm-hmm. I've heard this my entire life. Has to be true. Well, there was actually a giant study done in the UK where they retroactively looked in EMRs, or mm-hmm. electronic medical records. They looked at who was actually successful with conventional wisdom on weight loss, which is caloric restriction, mm-hmm. And also portion control. Mm-hmm. And when you combine men and women, it's a staggering failure rate. Mm-hmm. 99.2% of people fail.
Wow.
With portion control.
It's a high rate.
Yeah, and calorie restriction.
A lot of crushed dreams right there.
Right. So, mm-hmm. And in men, it's even worse, than females. So 1 in 210 obese men actually had success with this method. Right. Not to say you can't. Right. But you are one of a very few if you do. And there's specific reasons for that.
Well, and then success meaning sustainable long-term success.
Right.
Because as soon as I started to train, for me, so I went from November 2009, student athlete, jacked to the gills, could eat anything I want, to February of 2010, pretty regular, still have a fitness buffer. And then by May, I was almost 260 pounds with the same habits and different things like that. And I worked for 9 months to correct it using conventional wisdom. So I was caloric restriction.
Right.
I was trying to do I was mixing up my exercise a little bit, but my food plans were salads with soy sauce on them.
Sure.
And
sure.
this very high focus on I got to have less than 2,000. And I was successful. I went from that 260 to that 230, but I was miserable. Now,
sure.
there are some habits that I was still trying to, tweak and work on and, joining the office force and stuff like that. But for the most part, I spent a lot of time hungry and upset. And ultimately, I ditched that, gained weight back, and it was not a success with that particular method.
Right. And so there you go. That's one of the biggest issues with caloric restriction, is that ultimately there's one huge thing you're doing to sabotage yourself. Mm-hmm. And that is hopefully everybody hears this, when you reduce your calories actively, let's say that you're normally eating 2,300 calories a day, mm-hmm. and then MyFitnessPal tells you need to go to 1,500 calories a day.
Right.
Okay. You can look up, there was a study done back in the 1950s, so we've known this information for a very long time. Multiple studies corroborate that to this day. When you reduce your calories to try and lose weight, your metabolic rate slows down.
Okay.
So the problem with that is the long-term success. Okay, so like you said, for the first 6 months, you're motivated, right? You're hitting your calorie marks and you're losing weight. Well,
Right.
then what happens when you're all of a sudden your metabolic rate slows down to where you're burning 1,500 calories a day, and you're also only trying to eat 1,500 calories a day, and you're miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And you have, let's say an extra piece of cake that day.
Right.
Now, because your metabolic rate has slowed down, that extra piece of cake hurts you a lot more than it would have
Mm-hmm.
with your original metabolic rate.
Because of the adaptation that you make to the amount
Exactly.
of calories.
And then what's really scary about it, what no one talks about, is how long-term that effect is.
Mm-hmm.
So there was another study that was just released last year, the Biggest Loser study, and anybody can Google this,
Okay.
where they followed contestants on The Biggest Loser for
Mhm.
6 years after the show.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what's interesting is that on average, 6 years later, those contestants, now, mind you, this was a pretty extreme caloric restriction.
Yeah.
But those contestants on average versus someone who weighed the exact same as them, who did not do caloric restriction, burned an average, I believe, of 786 calories less a day.
Oh, wow.
So to put that into perspective, that's an extra double quarter pounder with cheese.
Right.
Meaning that if you and I weighed the same,
Mm-hmm.
you were on the show and I wasn't, I could sit in front of you and eat a double quarter pounder with cheese, and if you have 2 Cheez-Its, you've gone over your limit and you're going to slowly gain the weight back. So that's 6 years later that the metabolic rate didn't recover.
Right. So a caloric restriction strategy for your new diet. It's good that you have a strategy. There are other ways to skin the cat, so to speak. I'm curious, and I brought it. Let's see if I can bring it back into the drinks topic and why I asked of drinking stuff in between meals.
Sure.
Instead of reducing overall volume, whether that's calories or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
what about reducing frequency, right? So I
Sure.
have my first meal, no snacks till that second meal, and
Right.
trying to keep it to that 3 squares idea where I'm not experiencing an insulin spike in between
Sure.
when I'm having a good hearty insulin spike because I'm eating my food because it's time for me to eat. I'm hungry and those things. What's that strategy like for you?
Well, I mean, so reducing the amount of times that you're intaking food actually is a great strategy.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds like, if you were to ask a kid,
Mm-hmm.
how do you lose weight? They would say, well, you just don't eat, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's common sense for us when we're a kid.
Right.
But when we hear that as an adult, because we've
Mhm.
had it drilled into our heads year after
Right.
year,
6
6 small meals a day,
Mhm.
gotta have breakfast, et cetera, et cetera.
Ramp that metabolism up.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the information that's put out there like that was essentially put out there by the food industry. They want to sell you product. I mean, it's it puts money in their pockets, and if we disregard that, it's sort of like whenever you're studying, people always tell you consider the source. Make sure you know who's putting out the study that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes into play here too.
Right.
So with what you're talking about, in particular with insulin spikes, you're exactly right. If we're spiking insulin
Mm-hmm.
throughout the day a whole bunch of times, 5 to 6 times a day,
Mm-hmm.
one of the main jobs of insulin is actually to stop lipolysis from happening. So lipolysis is just the breakdown of fat. So everybody for the new year, right, they want to burn body fat. That's the gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
But then they eat 5 to 6 small meals a day. They spike their insulin 5 to 6 times a day, which means that insulin stops lipolysis from happening 5 to 6 times a day.
Wow.
So, one of the keys, if you really truly want to burn body fat, is to try to keep your insulin levels low. Right? So what you're saying with reducing the total amount of times you're eating in a day, it actually does make a lot of sense, and it does work very well for people. In fact, it works much better than your traditional caloric restriction in most cases. Again, maybe it's not the best idea for everybody, but it is a very viable option.
Right, yeah, and something to experiment with. So working to reduce frequency is a strategy, frequency of an insulin spike.
Mm-hmm.
So eating 2 or 3 meals a day as opposed to 3 big ones, 3 snacks, or whatever it is.
Sure.
And also, I mean, as you go into a cleaner kind of a diet, eating lower glycemic index kinds of food, increasing the quality of your foods too.
Right.
So, again, let's go back to our imaginary situation. I got the New Year's here. I've cleaned up my diet. I'm drinking my water. Stuff's moving around. It's water. It doesn't have extra stuff in it. I'm better off having 2-3 significant meals to manage those insulin spikes versus buying into some of that conventional wisdom to having those snacks and different things like that.
Yeah, I mean, simply put, absolutely. Okay. And again, that people are gonna think that this is crazy talk.
Right.
But you just do a simple Google search yourself, and obviously you can't trust everything that you read on the internet.
Of course.
But I think the problem is that it's almost like, what's the definition of insanity, right? We hear this a million times, as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Right.
So how many of us every January 1 restrict calories, go to the gym, and expect that we're going to have a different result from the last 10 years, right? So, if you really want to have success, you've got to try to think a little bit differently and seek out something different. And not everything is the best option out there.
Right.
That's for sure. Because a lot of things are just simply not sustainable, right? But simply put, as you did, yeah, that's a good option.
Let's go. All right. Protein, right? I'm there. I'm hitting the gym. Gotta up the protein, right? So depending on which bro you talk to, there is a lot of, so again, in my quest for ultimate size as a lean defensive end, got to have 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, right?
Sure.
And, I've played with different, ratios and different things like that, but generally speaking, what's a person need in regards to protein?
Yeah, so definitely not 2 grams per pound of body weight.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's kind of funny because I have heard that more recently.
Yeah.
The old gym science used to be 1 gram per pound of body weight, and even that was very, very hard to attain.
Right.
So
this was a very intense coach.
Yeah.
This was a very intense.
coach. So what is that? That is gym science.
Right.
It truly is gym science. For your average person, okay, just someone who may be not a bodybuilder, okay, right, but your average person for protein needs is 0.8 grams per kilogram. Okay. So that's the key. When people use pounds, what they don't understand is the typical recommendations are actually based on kilograms, which is your body weight divided by 2.2.
Right.
Okay. So you basically, if you wanted to do it quickly, and we said 115 just to use that as a
right.
Instead of doing 2.2, we'll do it by 2, right?
Right.
So 115 would come out to where your actual kilograms would be, and then you would multiply that by 0.8. That's for your average person. So let's say around 100 grams, right?
Okay. Yeah, so AJ weighs 115 kilograms, we'll say that,
right,
and I want to multiply that times 0.8, and we'll just call that 80% of that is, we'll just say that for AJ, a 6'3", 230-pound grown man needs approximately 100 grams of protein.
Right.
So we break that up to 33, and 34 because it's dinner time.
Sure.
So
and the other thing about that too is, if AJ is a bodybuilder, okay, do we have to get as crazy as the 2 grams per pound? No.
Right.
I tell even bodybuilders really not to bring that much over 1.75 grams per kilogram.
Right,
so
which
it's still much less than this 2 grams per
which
pound.
Is like knocking on the door of 1-to-1 pounds to grams.
Yeah, exactly. And that's at the highest level. If you are a true bodybuilder, right, which I don't know about people that work at the hospital here, but I'm not a bodybuilder.
A lot of jack dudes walking around.
They go to the basement one time, right? But but I'm not a bodybuilder. Do I need 1-to-1?
Of course.
No, absolutely not. So
yeah.
And the other thing is, people, you'll hear all kinds of debates.
Right.
Well, it's taxing on the kidneys to have extra protein, et cetera, et cetera. There is some research to support that. There is some research to support that excess animal protein taken in the diet is not beneficial. In fact, can increase your risk of developing certain types of cancers. Okay, so it's like in America we have this thought that if a little bit's good, a lot is
if exercise
much better,
is good,
right?
I got to be there 3 hours a day. I got to go much farther. When really we got to kind of try and find this sweet spot, right?
Sure.
So that that's a perfect paradigm where we talked about with diets, right? Restricting your calories to 700 is going to possibly cause some problems. There's one end of it. And then 6 meals throughout the day, that can, so we're looking for, the happy medium, which takes a little experimentation.
Sure.
But resisting the urge to go full ham bone into it and go all the way to the fringe is something that we have to do. So we're talking average Joe in this situation, so we can kind of throw up that calculation as a general guideline. But whatever you're trying to do with your physicality needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're recovering from playing sport, training, heavy weights, or whatever it is, you have to take those things into consideration.
Exactly.
But generally speaking, I think that offers a guideline there. Carbs. Again, we had the standard American diet. We had the food pyramid, and the base of that son of a gun was bread, cereals, rice, pastas, and we've seen, or at least this has been my observation in dieting and fitness and all these things, this big swing to ketogenics and no carbs and all these different things.
Sure.
Average Joe.
Right.
What's carbohydrate intake?
Sure.
Need to be.
So the by the book answer.
Tell me.
By the book answer is 45 to 65% of your diet.
Okay.
Now, do I necessarily agree that it has to be that high? Absolutely not.
Okay.
It's not necessary. By the book, it'll also tell you that you need at least 130 grams of carbs a day to maintain normal brain function.
Okay.
Do I agree with that? Also, no.
Right.
It does depend on certain chronic diseases. Maybe if you have type 1 diabetes, then is that something you should try to abide by? Possibly. Still, 130 is a little bit high. But with respect to carbohydrates, I think the issue has become that carbohydrates are in everything. Added sugars are in everything. I mean,
right.
And that's really the issue, is that it's not only that they're added to everything, but they're so refined compared to what they used to be. If you were to say 45 to 65% carbs, 30, 40 years ago,
right,
probably not as big of an issue as it is today, because then we're talking about natural sugars, right? Things coming from sources, let's say an apple, right? That, and fructose kind of has a bad name, but it's just a fruit sugar. Okay, so if you have your sugar source coming from an apple, which also includes fiber and things like that, don't allow you to digest all of it, and you do so more slowly, right? Versus you have sugar from a Coca-Cola, which is very commonplace today, or adding sugar to things like vegetables to get them to taste good, right?
Yeah.
And you would not believe all the things sugar is in.
Oh yeah, ketchup.
Yeah.
I'm really confused sometimes why ketchup isn't a dessert.
Yeah. There's a lot of sugar in a lot of ketchups.
Yes.
Peanut butter is another great example.
Yeah,
Most peanut butter is the second largest ingredient behind peanuts.
I think
is
a whole hour on how to read labels and this and that would be appropriate for us sometime. But
sure.
But
so yeah, I think that's a big delineating factor today too. Is everything's so much more refined. So getting back to the basics of eating something you can actually recognize that was grown, that goes a long way. And so to give a very specific amount of carbs, I really do think some people do better with a smaller amount than others. For athletes, I absolutely think they need to maintain a good amount of carbs in their diet, especially depending on what type of sport it is they're doing. But it's sort of catering to their lifestyle. So 45 to 65% is the by the book answer. Okay.
And then, so we have another 130 gram kind of a situation. So, so that's our, so again, talking to a dude starting his year out, working for this ratio for protein, and then looking in this 130 or whatever your diet is, as per what you're trying to do, 45 to 55,
65,
45 to 65% of carbohydrates. So while we're working to eat those for the new year, working to manage those in 2 or 3 meals, trying to reduce the frequency that we're spiking our insulin, making sure that we have some water to move all those things around. And that gives us, I think, some starting points looking forward to a new year, some practical tips. It might take a little calculating for yourself, but I can make some nifty spreadsheets, and I'm sure there's some that are already out there.
Sure.
So one of the reoccurring trends is the sustainability piece. What besides sustainability, what are the downfalls in modern dieting in this this food situation that we have?
Yeah. Well, the biggest downfall in modern dieting is if you have to call it a diet, it's not something you should be on,
right?
Because it's not sustainable. So to me, the number one downfall is the sustainability piece, and I guess the way I'll put this is, it takes a lot of motivation to stick to a diet where you're eating completely different than you have your entire life. Okay,
right.
So let's take a ketogenic diet as an example.
Right, and ketogenic meaning mostly meats and fats, very little carbohydrate.
Well, and see, actually, ketogenic is commonly misinterpreted.
Okay.
So ketogenic is actually a diet that is very high in fat, moderate in protein, and very low in carbs.
That's right.
So so when you hear, some people do believe that it's very high in protein, but actually it's not. So so when you take a diet like a ketogenic diet, can you lose weight on a ketogenic diet? Most people would say, oh, it's high in fat. Absolutely not. But yes, you absolutely can lose weight on a ketogenic diet. But again, what happens 3 months from now when you lose motivation to go out and buy all these special types of foods? You go right back to where you were. So sustainability is a huge issue. The other thing is, unfortunately, if we're bringing this up, people try to monetize diets. Right. So they say,
my system.
Yeah. Hey,
I have the answer.
Let
I can
me
tell
sell
you what
this
to do.
to you.
Right.
And I may not have a background.
By the way, if you can go to Amazon.com/Adam and AJ have a book.
Yeah, exactly. So that's unfortunately. And I know this sounds bad, and sometimes people believe they have stumbled onto good principles,
right.
But a lot of times they put this information out, not really necessarily caring so much as to whether or not it is, 100% true scientifically or will help. But the fact is, can I make money off of this?
Right. When really it's an N of one kind of a situation, or it worked for a handful of other folks that all did triathlons.
Yeah, and you got to think, like, if you're going to a source that's also trying to sell you something, what I tell everybody who comes in to see me is, if I'm a dietitian who's also trying to sell you supplementation, right? If I'm selling you supplements as well, find another dietitian,
right?
Because it's a conflict of interest, right?
You don't want your lawyer to have a pro shop downstairs too,
right?
No, those are great points. And since we got into them, we talked protein, carbs, and so fats. This is just a new thing, and again, you'd mentioned the ketogenic where fats are back, and no, low fats back. These different things. What and you can kind of give me a true, false, and write me on this. As far as incorporating fats into my diet, for training for sport, they're good because they're calorically dense, so you don't have to eat a ton of them. I can, in a couple of spoonfuls of coconut oil, I'm going to get way more calories than bushels and bushels of broccoli. Right. For me, I work to find high quality sources of fat. Whether that's coconut oil, better quality olive oils, higher quality butters, and different things like that because they're good. What are some of the general principles, the very basics for fats?
Yeah, so that's kind of the thing is, are fats quite as detrimental for health as we always have been taught to believe? Right. Because fats have been demonized for a long time. Right. And that's actually an interesting kind of USDA story. I
For
won't
sure.
get into that. But
Right.
are they quite as bad as we've been taught? No. However, again, come back to the whole argument that we talked about earlier with everything being much more refined, right? So same thing with fat sources and things like
White
that
sugar,
today, right?
Crisco, two things that have basically already been chewed up and put together for you.
Yeah, and
right?
so
and last
like
I checked,
you
you're not a baby bird, and I'm not a baby bird, and I don't need
Right.
mama, you know.
So it's just like what you said, though. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, yes, the fats are extremely healthy, but you've got to get good, wholesome sources of that, right? So when you're reading a book and it tells you can eat all the bacon in the world and you're going to be super healthy, it's wrong, okay?
Right.
But you might sell a lot of books because people want to eat more bacon.
And
right?
I want some confirmation
Yeah.
bias that excuses this particular behavior.
Yeah, and so one of the things that saturated fats in particular, which we have demonized, right? The issue is that these trans fats have kind of come into the food supply, which
and
a lot of people
saturated
don't believe.
meaning animal type fats.
Sure.
Would also include things like coconut oil, and then trans fats would be
anything that's
and things like that.
Actually, anything that's hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated.
So like oils from some plants, cottonseed and soybean.
Well, not naturally,
Okay,
right?
okay.
So
Pardon me.
it's generally a chemically altered fat. So
I see.
this would be the easiest example. Two examples would be microwave popcorn and peanut butter.
Okay.
Jif peanut butter, choosy moms choosing Jif are choosing wrong. Okay, unless they're choosing Jif natural.
Right.
And
okay.
so when you look on the back, right, of a Jif label, you're going to see that it says 0 grams of trans fat.
Okay.
Another labeling law loophole.
Right.
When you look in the ingredients, you will see that one of the main ingredients is a either fully hydrogenated vegetable oil or partially. So it does have trans fats, which are much worse for our health than saturated fat.
Okay.
And unfortunately, because we've demonized saturated fats, these trans fats have really kind of, they're still in the food supply. People don't believe they are, but they're hidden like that.
Right.
And now that we've kind of come out with this idea that they're going to go away, they're working on other chemically altered fats. So is saturated fat more healthy for you than trans? Absolutely. Okay, so butter versus margarine, what am I going to pick? I'm going to pick butter. That might sound crazy to some people. But I guess the idea is that saturated fats as a whole do have the ability to kind of decrease nitric oxide production. Which is, if you're in the sports world, nitric oxide,
NO2,
that's
you need it for the pump.
Right. So it's a big, it's a hot topic, and really, it really helps us dilate our blood vessels as normal. So it can help control blood pressure, right? And it's a very healthy thing that's produced by the endothelial cells. And saturated fat, especially once we absorb it, can really slow down the production of NO2. So is it healthy in massive quantities? No. But if you have one slice of bacon, is that going to hurt you?
Right.
No, that's not going to hurt you either. So again, that classic thing we've always heard, moderation.
Right.
There is some truth to that, no doubt, and it's a good thing to practice. But like you said, seeking those healthy sources.
Wow. So that's what let's take our lady, starting the new year off, drinking some water, right? Got some guidelines on carbohydrates, got some guidelines on protein. Let's choose some high quality or higher quality sources of fat. Don't go bonkers on any of them. See if you can avoid the hydrogenated oils, and you can help yourself out. Looking forward to your new diet regimen, your new exercise regimen, and then also trying to keep it to a few meals versus 6 small ones, and snacking or just some low-hanging fruit things that, no pun intended, that people can do to help themselves out this diet season.
Yeah, it is. And, I know that you kind of talked with me about these various diets.
So this is what I want to do. So the last thing I want to do is I want to read through a list of diets / buzzwords that we hear, and I just want you to tell me the first thing that comes to mind.
I might expand a little bit.
It's okay.
Okay.
You can do whatever you want, but I'll go. Help yourself. So I have a few of these things. Some of them may be controversial. Some of them, if you put any one of these words into YouTube, you'll be able to figure out what it is that I'm talking about. And some of these terms, again, like wellness, nutrition, these things can be thrown around and abused a lot, so kind of keep that in mind. But coming from a dietitian, an expert in the food that goes into people's bodies, right, and what it does to them and how it can help them, I want you to react or tell me about Paleo.
Paleo, okay. Extremely popular, right?
Okay.
Good overall principles.
Got it.
Founded on totally false information, right? So the whole basis of Paleo is that our ancestors were much healthier than us because their diets were 50+% protein, right? Which is, unfortunately, that's just wrong.
Right.
A lot of our ancestors subsisted on starchy vegetables, believe it or not. Because
and whatnot.
Yeah, they're hunter-gatherers, right? So they didn't always have meat. Yes, a lot of the principles of Paleo are good, but again, not sustainable, unfortunately, because for most people, that requires them going out and buying foods, a lot of foods that they may have never bought before.
Right.
So it kind of narrows your grocery list, and for that reason, I think a lot of people stick to it for 6 months and then it's done. But it does have some good principles.
Oh, definitely. Ketogenic.
So again, ketogenic, very high fat diet, moderate protein, very low carbohydrate. And does it work for weight loss, which is what most people use it for? It does have some applications, I believe, in a population who has epilepsy.
Yeah.
Don't quote me, but there is
a lot of neuro situations.
Sure.
Responding to not breathing for a long time.
Right.
There's some research.
Yeah, so it does have benefits for therapeutic reasons. There's something that everybody would hate associated with it called the keto flu, where people just feel horrible after a while.
That initial sickness.
Yeah. But it does kind of train our body to function on a different medium than normal, which is we're so used to high sugar all the time. So will you lose weight on a ketogenic diet? Yes, but again, what's the big issue with it? You're going out and buying very specialized types of foods, and for that reason, it's quite unsustainable for most people.
Right. And specialized, that can sound special and nice sometimes, but that just might mean that you are eating a lot of ground beef and the same thing over and over again, which can be boring, right?
Again, and that's the same thing, like what you're saying there. Some people, when they say, I'm a vegan, but their diet consists of potato chips all the time.
Right.
Is that really what the principle of a vegan was supposed to be? Not necessarily.
Tell me about your oatmeal. So let's use that one, vegan.
Sure. So vegan is overall extremely healthy.
Okay.
Much less issue than a lot of people get nervous about vegan, think that they're going to be deficient in all kinds of vitamins and minerals. Really not being been proven to be true. Even B12, which we say is only in animal foods, most vegans are not deficient in B12. So is it healthy? Absolutely. Should be used for cardiac. If you have any cardiac issues, vegan diet is great.
Roger that. Atkins.
So Atkins... I think Atkins has come a long way. Initially, it was just extremely low carbohydrate, and maybe didn't include some of the good principles it does in a more modern time. Is there anything wrong with extremely low carb? Not necessarily, but again, not sustainable for most people, because how many restaurants do you go to that serve you extremely low carb food, right? So it's just unfortunately not very sustainable.
Roger that. Juicing.
This, believe it or not, can go two different ways.
Okay.
So the person that sees, juicing on TV and says that's a great idea, I'm gonna go buy a juicer from Walmart and start this tomorrow. Unfortunately, what they do is they buy a whole bunch of fruits, right? And so effectively what they do is hyper concentrate sugar, and they drink a lot of it. Yep. Okay. And they will gain a lot of weight. And then they say, well, I thought this was supposed to help me lose weight. If you are going to be doing juicing, which can be extremely healthy, really need to be doing so with primarily vegetables. A little fruit for flavor, but that should not be the primary. And what I'll tell you too is there is a huge variety of juicers, and a vast majority of them are not going to produce good quality juices. So do your homework before you buy one, but it can be healthy. You're definitely going to absorb the vitamins and minerals from a good wholesome, vegetable-based juice better than a multivitamin.
Sounds like you can benefit from a little research and figuring out what gear to get and what variety of fruits and veggies to put in there, not just go just whole.
Yeah. Because I have seen that personally, where people will gain a lot of weight very quickly because it's just fruit-based juices every single day, and that's you're asking for trouble there.
Okay. I'm going to skip low carb and let's go to Mediterranean.
Sure. So Mediterranean, I guess the big buzzword with Mediterranean is oils, right?
Oh, yeah.
So everybody gets obsessed about the fact that Mediterranean diet is pretty heavy in olive oil and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So people go out in the United States and they buy tons of olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you there's a huge issue with that here, especially in the United States. Unfortunately, I believe it's something like 90% of olive oil that is on the shelf, extra virgin olive oil, is not actually extra virgin olive oil at all.
What a hoax.
And so unfortunately the health benefits then are out the window as well.
Right.
And you can look into this. This sounds crazy, but there is organized crime involved in this process, which is
you look into it.
Yeah, it's it's a serious topic. The other thing is with these oils, people want to put them on everything, right? So they cook with them. They'll put, and that's right there. When you take olive oil and heat it, regardless of what you hear, it's not a very high temperature oil. So once it heats to its smoke point, all those health benefits are lost.
Right.
So number one, if you're gonna start adding those to your diet, make sure that you are look up which olive oils are actually real. First of all, which ones contain actual 100% olive oil, because you're going to be blown away. So find one of those, which is going to be expensive, unfortunately. And then the other thing is to make sure that you're not using it primarily in cooking. Use it to drizzle on your foods for things like salad dressings, etc. Because that's really where you're going to get the health benefits from.
Roger that. Right. And then the last one, intermittent fasting.
Sure. So intermittent fasting, it's pretty buzzworthy right now.
Right.
In short, I think it's great. Does it work for every population? No. There are some people that should not do intermittent fasting. Let's just say someone recovering from surgery, someone who's pregnant or breastfeeding, a prepubescent child. There are just some populations that should not do it. However, as a diet as a whole, I love it.
Right on. Yo también. Yeah, me too. It's been something for me. Sustainability was a key word, and solving a problem with subtraction rather than addition, I think is a good way to be successful. The less conscious we have to be about these decisions, the less extra effort we have to put in, the more as much as we love to have, I got the willpower of a honey badger, as much as we like to think these things, those things can fatigue us over time, and same thing with our decision making and things like that.
Well, and that's and I agree with you, and that's something I've seen in practice over time. If I have someone come in and I give them 60 things to do versus one thing not to do, much more sustainable, and I have had much greater success with people. Primarily people are using it for weight loss. There are other reasons to do it as well that some people might use it for, but great.
Adam Lawrence, this was fantastic. Your shoes and socks look incredible. Your information is outstanding. Thank you for spending time with me.
Thanks, buddy.
Extras, bloopers, and silliness.
Adam Lawrence, what did you eat for breakfast?
I did not eat breakfast.
What was the first thing that you ate today?
Lunch. It was the Christmas, whatever we had for Christmas. I guess it was chicken cordon bleu.
Ooh.
And salad. And
Wonderful.
I did have some German chocolate cake.
Powerful German chocolate.
So you want me to look at the camera or kind of be looking at you?
Yeah. So we'll stare deeply into each other's eyes.
Ooh, I like that.
I had fun.